Afternoon, buddy.
Hi mate, how you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. This is exciting.
I know, I've been looking forward to this all week.
I see Harry's hiding in the wings.
Yeah, here he is.
Hi, just tuning in. How you doing, guys?
Hi, Harry, nice to see you.
Cheers.
Oh,
How are we doing? Welcome to Career in Ruins, everyone.
Yeah, so what are we going to be talking about today, Lawrence?
We are doing a bit of pre-project sort of desk-based work, I guess is the best way to call it. We're sort of scoping out our site, doing some planning and getting ready for some field work, which is really exciting.
Really exciting.
I mean, that's right. We're finally taking Career in Ruins out of the recording booth and into a field. And we're going to do field work.
Yes, yeah. I mean, obviously we're coming out of lockdown. Everything's opening up a bit more and easing, and we're planning to be sensibly socially distanced, but in a way that is outdoors and a bit more exciting and informative, perhaps, than sitting at a desk chatting nonsense.
What's really useful about this as well, I can use it as a virtual practical for some of my undergraduate teaching, which will be incredibly useful.
That's it. So what's this? Give us a bit more of a background about the site, Derek.
So it's a site in Purbeck. It's within the study area known as the Place Universe. I'll call it that for now. Which Harry's joining us today. We've been researching now for probably about 5 years now, haven't we? We've been doing various bits of survey work and field work. And a few years ago, we did some fairly large scale excavations where we identified a medieval salt working complex, but also some other features like a post-medieval house and a Roman pottery kiln. But what's always interested me is the later prehistoric bits of the Purbeck landscape, particularly in and around Poole Harbour, because of the continental connection and the fact that in this part of the world, we seem to have a fairly smooth transition from Iron Age to Romano-Britain. And to see that in the archaeological record would be incredible from a research perspective. So one site we've identified and we've been doing some work on for the last few years. It's a little bit inland from the harbour, so it's not my traditional fare, but I was first alerted to it by some field walking finds. Some bits of prehistoric and Roman pots started turning up on the surface, and it piqued my interest. And since then, I've been having a good look at various data sets and various resources to see what's there.
So those of us that aren't, or those followers and watchers that aren't Dorset based, where's Poole Harbour? Where are we talking in the world?
So Poole Harbour's in southern Britain, just northwest of the Isle of Wight, if you're looking at the map from a distance. And it's the country's largest inland natural harbour, and it's in the top something of the world. I should know that better. Harry might be able to save me here.
I think it's the third largest natural harbour in the world.
I'll take that. So it's a phenomenon.
Various arguments about which is the biggest, and it depends how you measure it, but it's pretty big.
Volume versus depth. Anyway, but so it's in southern Britain, and it's a really significant place historically and archaeologically from thousands of years ago to today. Really, it was. We know there was lots of trading and exchanging activity going on in late prehistory and into the Roman period. We know that there was a significant amount of medieval industry, but it was also the central area for what's known as Operation Smash, which was a Second World War military operation where they were essentially testing for D-Day landings. And the field we're looking at is within that operation area. Going back into history a bit more, the landscape in the area was really active within the English Civil War. And this field, again, may have some Civil War elements to it as well.
Awesome. So whilst Paul Harbour looks at volume over depth, we're going to be looking at some depth over volume. We're thinking about some small scale trenches to target some potential features. Have you got any idea of what sort of time period we might be looking at, and what is it that's sort of brought your guys' attention to this particular site?
This field's a tricky one in a way, because it's almost got too much archaeological information for what is essentially a agricultural field. There's a smorgasbord of material on the surface. I went for just a casual field walk the other day looking for any archaeological artifacts, and as I walked across the field, I found about 2,000 years worth of different ceramics from various periods. So it could be that there's an abundance of archaeology, and actually finding the elements we're looking for could be quite tricky, particularly if we're looking for the later prehistoric stuff. But it's a field that I think is quite characteristic of archaeology in Britain, in that the majority of the buried past isn't kind of a fancy Roman villa on a country estate, or a medieval monastery in someone's back garden. It's agricultural fields. That is the archaeology of Britain. So, and I think this field is one of many that is quite indicative of a fairly extensive buried past that we know very little about, really.
Fair enough. And so you mentioned you and Harry have been doing some studying around this area. And Harry, have you got any data or evidence that's sort of been pulled up about this site so far?
Yeah, we actually had a student who looked at it as part of her dissertation project, Jodie, and she did a fantastic survey. And if I just share my screen, we can take a look at that within.
Drum roll, please.
GIF. There we go.
Oh, wow.
So what we're looking at here is magnetometry data. That's what the black and white or grayscale image is towards the center. And what that is showing us is really subsurface changes in the soil's magnetism. And essentially where a ditch or a pit has been dug into the earth, there's more topsoil in there. And so therefore it's more magnetic. And so it responds to the sensors which we run across the ground surface in a stronger way. And effectively we can record every 50 centimeters as we go up a line and horizontally across the field. We can record this at a really, really fine scale, these changes in subsurface magnetism. And where we get these darker responses, these bands or these circular or subcircular anomalies is what we call them, they tend to indicate some form of buried archaeology. And this is a really sort of typical tool we use in archaeological prospection to try and determine what's beneath the ground surface. But if I just turn off that moment, we can actually begin to see in this aerial image, and this is imagery from Google Earth, we can begin to see some very faint traces of what we call linears, I guess. These are in the crop marks. These are in the grass or the early stages of growth in a cereal crop. And where they're just starting to green up earlier, that tends to indicate slightly deeper soils, and therefore they've got more moisture in the soils, and therefore the growth rate is accelerating, and therefore we get slightly greener vegetation contrasting against the sort of brown soil.
So those crop marks are mirroring what's visible in the geophysical data. Is that right?
Absolutely, and that actually is, along with the field walking data, really is a first clue about what could be buried beneath. And typically in a situation like this, someone may be surfing through Google Earth, may identify that there's some interesting crop marks, and then contact local archaeologists or local interest group, who will then commission a geophysical survey. And in this case, this is what happened. We got contacted, and we thought it was a perfect opportunity for one of our students to carry out a geophysical survey.
So it's pretty obvious there's a lot of magnetic data and activity, and those crop marks back that up. But what makes us think that this is older or more interesting than perhaps historic field boundaries? I mean, this is an agricultural field. Why aren't these just old ditches and banks and drainage ditches associated with agricultural processes?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, and it really is to do with the shape of them. it's all to do with their characteristics. So in more modern times, or historical times, the field boundaries and plough marks, for example, tend to be a lot straighter. So they're going across the field, and they tend to follow field boundaries. So here we've got a hedge line, for example. These are a lot more curvy. There seems to be enclosures and so on. And then we've got these smaller, very dense pockets of magnetism, which may be indicative of deep pits. Also, Derek was saying about the multiple layers of archaeology in terms of the pottery remains he was recording and recovering as part of his field walking. That suggests that that this actually is a multi-phase or multi-period site, and we can see that again in the geophysics. We can see some of these strong anomalies. If they're ditches, they're cutting across each other. So we're not just looking at one particular period in time. We're actually looking at a palimpsest of different time periods, and they're kind of superimposed on top of each other. And as an archaeologist and a geophysicist and a archaeological prospector, if you like, we have to tease apart those different layers and try and interpret them.
Nice. So Della, you've been doing the walkovers. You've looked at other accessible data. Is that right, in terms of county records and things like that? Has any of this helped us to sort of come up with an area where we're thinking of perhaps targeting?
Yeah, I think so. If I could bring up my screen now, with any luck. Hopefully you can see this one. Is that showing up okay?
Yeah, very little.
This is a wonderful website called Dorset Explorer, which records a lot of historic environment data within it. It works much like a geographic information system, as Harry was using just now, but online. And there's a number of interesting find spots in the historic environment data, which suggest that this was quite an interesting, or at least a busy place in the past. This one particularly, a Roman coin found just in the west of that field. Another bit of characteristic Roman pottery. And what's interesting about this is casual find spots don't tend to get recorded in the HER. They tend to have to be something quite special. So I suspect both of these are quite interesting artifacts. But if we could quickly go back to Harry's screen, if that's okay.
So just before Harry brings that up, so we've got our anomalies, we've got our geophysics and our crop marks, and a number of potentially significant Roman finds within the HER records. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. And within the geophysics area, so if we can have a look at that, we also did a systematic, or I say we, the royal we, that's a classic lecturer talk, isn't it? Jody and colleagues and friends did a systematic field walking survey where they walked over this area in defined 20 by 20 meter grids and recorded all of the pottery that came from each of those grids. And there were some areas that clustered more than others with prehistoric types of pottery or Roman types of pottery. There was a pretty even spread of historic material and post-medieval material, but it was very much the northwest of the site that gave the most abundance of those types of materials in the midst of that quite kind of dark, busy enclosure area. Just under Harry's cursor at the moment.
Got live GIS on the go.
Yeah, I'm enjoying this.
The Tinker Man is tinkering.
I can't help but tinker.
But yeah, this little bit here that Harry was just waving at is very much the area that seems to be quite active, but it's also quite interesting topographically. Obviously, we're looking down on the field at the moment.
I'm really intrigued by that, Derek. Tell us more about this, because you hinted about it earlier.
Yeah,
I think that's so telling, the topography. It's often overlooked as well. People get very sucked into the geophysics, but sometimes you just take a step back and actually look at the lie of the land, really, and see how things fit together.
I think that's just it. And as I say, you can't see the topography on the aerial image, but as you enter the field, for example, from the west, and you walk into the field, walking up towards this geophysics, you would be walking up a steady slope. And as you get to the kind of the edge of the geophysical survey, and you can kind of see why it stopped there, you start to get onto the crest of a knoll, which has got a bit of a flat plateau. And it's very much a place in the field that if you were to say, okay, I'm going to build something, I'm going to put it here, because it has that kind of topographic character to it, and it fits very neatly with the enclosures, which if you rationalize it as a human being in the past, digging a ditch or putting an enclosure in or a structure, you would tend to accentuate the topography anyway. That's quite normal in prehistory. So it's what gives me hope that some of these curvilinear features could well represent an enclosure of that plateaued area.
That's amazing. So we've got this amazing little knoll. We've got amazing finds from multiple time periods. We've got geophysics and aerial imagery that show sort of, as Harry called it, a palimpsest of interacting features. And we're speculating that it's multi-time period. There may be a Romano-British focus. There may be some earlier prehistoric activity as well. But really, with everything, as a wise man once said to me on an excavation, we've got to excavate, not speculate. Is that what we're thinking?
Don't speculate, excavate.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. Trademark Harry Manley.
Wise words indeed. I mean, you're absolutely right. What we don't know about this field is anything that's going on beyond the geophysics, anything that's going on 10 centimeters below the play soil. And before we do anything or we start to make any assumptions about any of this, we need to understand the subsurface character of the soil a lot better than we currently do. Even in the most minimal sense of knowing how deep the play soil is, how shallow the subsoil is, what type of soil contrast can we expect to find, what is the underlying geology of the field. We suspect it's probably clay. That's pretty normal for this part of the world, but we don't know yet enough of the kind of the underground character of the site to really understand this data. So the first thing we need to do, or the first thing I would like to do, is characterize the field as such to understand the data we've got on it.
Excellent. That's really exciting. So we're thinking around a 5-meter trench, something like that. Or did you have or are you thinking multiple smaller trenches?
It's a tricky one. We've got a few different approaches we could take here. I favour the kind of the long and thin approach. I think is can give us an awful lot of information, because we might be able to identify structural information if we do that. We could do what's called a test pitting survey, where we put a series 1 by 1 meter test pits to get a broad character of the site. But I think because we've got the geophysics and we could actually target things, I'd be much more happy, I think, actually trying to characterize one of these features as well as the field, so putting in a targeted trench.
That's really interesting, because I guess test pitting is quite a popular approach for sort of media-based archaeology on a whole host of different programs we've seen in the past. But I think this is quite important to a point that you made earlier, that this is agricultural land, this is landscape archaeology. It's not in someone's back garden, so we're able to be a bit more ambitious with our time, whilst we do only have 2 days to find out.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Test pitting is a great way of assessing an area, if you will, and it's great for just getting a really keyhole interventions and getting sort of a broad understanding of a landscape or an area if we don't have any additional evidence. But as Derek's already said, we've got a lot of evidence from field walking and what's been recorded in the Dorset Historic Environment Record. We've got the geophysical data, which is really, really, really powerful, because it can allow us to locate very precisely a series of trenches, or one trench, or more than one trenches. We've also got to consider manpower as well. If we were test pitting across a landscape, we would need a lot of people. I don't think we're going to have a lot of people to do this. So I think just going for one really well positioned trench will allow us to really answer some very simple questions, as Derek outlined earlier, talking about or thinking about the depth of the soil, thinking about what are the characteristics of that soil, what is actually forming these magnetic anomalies, how deep are they, how wide are they. We can begin to answer those questions relatively straightforwardly by putting in just 1 or 2 relatively well-positioned trenches. And the great thing about this data is we know exactly where it is in the real world. So we've got numbers, we've got coordinates associated with this geophysical survey. we can tap into those coordinates, upload them to a GPS, and then we can navigate out to sort of 2 or 3 centimeter accuracy, and then stake out a trench exactly where these anomalies should be, and that will really help us tie down our survey area.
So two final questions that spring to mind then, chaps. So first of all is why are we digging? Are we just digging for digging's sake, or what's the purpose of what's going to be the outcome of this excavation? What if we get that insight that Harry talks about? What are we hoping that it'll lead on to or inform?
And there's 2 things to think about here. One of them is the research imperative, in that within this landscape there are some significant research questions of national importance, and we can go and look to resources such as the Agenda for Research in the Iron Age, for example, which was published by a collective of prehistoric scholars who identified key research questions that, if they were answered, we would understand our history significantly better. And one of those is to investigate Dorset more than we currently do. The other as well is the preservation issue, and I would argue that's probably more important, in that the biggest threat to archaeology in Britain is agriculture. It's just a fact. As agriculture improves and becomes more intensive, the depth of ploughing gets greater, and the threat to the historic environment also gets greater. The important point is, sorry,
I was going to say, you're telling me the road going past Stonehenge isn't the biggest threat to archaeology in the UK?
Don't get me started on that yet. It's one of the previous podcasts.
How long have you got?
But the need to, without understanding a site, we can't hope to protect it. So if we don't know there's anything there, we can't put any mitigations in place to preserve that site for future generations. No archaeologists want, well, actually we do, we want to dig, but we dig as a last resort. It's the way, it's destructive, it's not a repeatable experiment. Once you've dug, you can't re-dig it. So we have to do it well, and we have to do it right. But in doing it and understanding it just a little bit more, we stand to be able to protect the wider resource, which I think is the most important thing here.
Yeah, and just to build on what Derek was saying there as well, Lawrence, earlier on you asked me how we're interpreting these different anomalies, and I base my answer upon previous experience and previous knowledge. We only get that knowledge through excavation. We can look at crop marks, for example here, and we can hazard a guess and say, actually, this is very similar to something which has been excavated 50 miles away, 100 miles away. It looks Iron Age, it looks Romano-British. But until we actually go in there and maybe find some dating evidence, look at the form, look at the characteristics of the soil and the shape of any negative features, we don't actually know for sure. And so therefore, lots of these wider surveys can't actually be contextualized until we get some of this much more precise data. So that's why we're not doing a huge, wide open area excavation. We're just giving a very precise keyhole insertion, if you like, into a small area, which will give us a maximum amount of information with a minimum amount of digging. And that will help us then contextualize the crop marks. It will help contextualize the field walking finds, and it was also help us contextualize the wider geophysics as well. What we've got then is hopefully quite a rich data set, which we can then feed back into that wider research agenda related to Poole Harbour and the wider Dorset landscape as well. So it's really, really exciting. It's a great opportunity to actually go out and, we're a field archaeologist, we're landscape archaeologists, we love digging, but also we've got some really clear, crisp, precise questions which we can answer hopefully in how long was it? Was it 2 weeks? Was it?
You got 2 days, I think. so based on that, I mean that makes complete sense, doesn't it? And hopefully that's come across in this video to our audience. But so it's time to pin our colours to the mast, and I think we should each state now one thing that we think we're going to find in this trench.
Well, I'll go first. We're going to find black burnished ware.
So what's black burnished ware, Harry? Are you talking about a giant monument?
No, I'm talking about pottery. talking about small fragments of pottery, but it's very characteristic of the late Iron Age. And thank you, Derek. You found something I found.
Is that from the field?
So that's very characteristic of the late Iron Age and Romano-British period, particularly around Poole Harbour as well. So it's a local prehistoric pottery style, but that pottery style is found further afield because the Roman industrial complex, if you like, really ramped up production of that, and we saw it end up all over Roman Britain. So
you've gone for, you think we're going to find a locally produced ceramic item from the Romano-British Iron Age period? That's your guess?
I'm playing a safe bet.
Derek, are you going to be more adventurous?
Yeah, given I found this bit of black burnish wearing that.
I didn't know.
Harry wins.
We're going to find
Harry's winning.
How about that?
I mean, I know what I'd love to find. I would love to find something structural or some feature that we can really tie down to being something that was made. In terms of ceramics, I think we might find something imported. I think given the proximity to the harbour and the likelihood of trade and those kind of connections, I think we could find something imported. And I mean, what I'd love this to be, and it could be, we don't know, is where the folks were living who were working down at the port at Poole Harbour. We get a lot of industry on the harbour, but we don't get much settlement. And I'd love to find that settlement.
I'm with you. I think I'm going to go habitation beyond evidence of through black burnish ware or everyday material goods. I like to think we're going to find something structural, whether it's a drip gully to a roundhouse or a hearth or something like that. I'm going big.
Okay, well, I'll raise you. I'll see your habitation structures. And how about a few graves? How about that?
Oh, I hope not.
Throw that
We're going to have to get the right forms in place for that.
That's paperwork I'm not mentally prepared for.
Yeah. Don't jinx it. Why would you say that, Harry?
Oh, fantastic. I'm looking forward to getting in the field now. Should we just go and dig a hole?
Yeah, so we've got a few days to finish our planning. We are getting all our bits together. We're waiting for lockdown to end, so we're following all the rules correctly, and we'll keep sharing our results as and when they come together. But stay tuned. Any further comments?
Well, I think the next thing which we need to plan is really where we're going to put that trench. We've got an abundance of anomalies, so we'll put something together and share that with you guys, and then we can start thinking about doing an excavation, can't we?
I'm excited.
Me too.
Can't wait to see that black burnish ware.
Hey, what this?
Oh yeah, good boy. 10 a penny.
Spoiler alert.
All right, guys, I'll see you very soon.
Cheers.
Yeah.